Hello, all you lovely cosmonauts. As always, I am Cosmic, and today we're going to be talking about Brash Games. Because recently it has been alleged and discovered that Brash Games isn't all on the up and up. Now, for those of you who don't know what Brash Games is, it is a video game website based in the UK that was basically a lesser known site, but it was still on the aggregate sites like OpenCritic, Metacritic, and Game Rankings, and they primarily focused on video game reviews. Now, they had a staff that comprises of the editor-in-chief and owner of the site, which was Paul Ryan, and they also had several writers, and the majority of the staff, like most basically smaller sites, were unpaid volunteers looking to get some experience in the industry and get their name out there, which is not necessarily uncommon in that regard. Many sites do have unpaid volunteers. It's very difficult for a new site or a very small site to get revenue streams big enough to pay a full writing staff. So you tend to have these sites attract writers on the basis of exposure and experience, because they're able to get them, review codes and that kind of thing, and, basically get some experience to put on their resume and CV for the future. Now, it has been found out that basically Brash Games and the editor-in-chief Paul Ryan have done a few things that are not only unprofessional but outright disgusting. The first is that after a member of staff leaves that website, whether on good terms or not, Paul Ryan decides that they do no longer deserve credit for the work that they put in, and he removes their accreditation for any written article and puts his own name in there, which is fairly a disgusting move from anyone, especially a site owner. Furthermore, he decided that he would, in fact, regardless of what the reviewer said in terms of the score that it was given, they were going to change the score and put on what they wanted or what they felt would look good to companies and video game publishers, no doubt. In the cases, there have been several allegations from former writers. OpenCritic have led an investigation into the site, and OpenCritic themselves have put out a statement saying that they have found traces of attempted cover-ups, including efforts such as editing or deleting old reviews, sending legal documents to the point or to other sites and other reviewers, including DMC takedowns and that kind of thing. They have openly blocked OpenCritic team members' IP addresses from viewing the site. They have Paul Ryan has sent threats to writers, past writers, and other outlets. And overall, it's a giant clusterfuck. Just plain and simple. I wanted to weigh in on it because I have numerous experience with Enthusiast Press. I have worked as a video game journalist for several years. I have worked for small sites. I freelance for big sites. I have worked as an editor. I've worked as a CMO of a site. So I have experience in pretty much every possible job in terms of a traditional games website that you could ask for. And I wanted to basically give you an insight into the darker side of small video game websites, the darker side of Enthusiast Press, and how that directly relates to what you can see on the outside from Brash Games. So first, let's start with Brash Games. So Brash Games, everything they've done is completely wrong. Not only is it wrong, it is unprofessional, it is not how journalism is supposed to be done, and most severely and importantly, it is misleading, lying, unethical, and harmful to you, the consumer. It is absolutely unforgivable. And the fact that they ghosted themselves by changing the metadata for OpenCritic, Metacritic, so that they would be removed from there, so that those sites wouldn't see what they were doing. Not to mention the fact that as a PR strategy goes, when these allegations have come out recently, they've decided to basically put their head in the sand. They've basically unfollowed on Twitter about 100,000 people instantly unfollowed 100,000 people. They recently actually tried to recruit me to their site as well, which was hilarious from the standpoint of me. But it's one of those things where they basically will not apologize. Clearly, they don't give a shit. They don't care about what they've done to these writers. They do not care about misleading you, the consumer. They don't care about ethics. They do not care about professionalism. What they care about is money and making sure that that site still brings that owner money. Now, this is very synonymous with a lot of sites, and I'll be honest with you, a lot of the smaller video game sites you have to be careful with. There are many, many good ones out there. There are many good ones that have a number of professional standards, journalistic ethics. They have systems in place to stop anything bad from happening. Brash Games is one of those that does not. And this can be clearly told by the fact how this all started. This all started in terms of getting the biggest spotlight on it by one of the reviewers who had his review score changed despite his objections to having his review score changed. He then edited his article and the review itself and put into the review what had happened, what was going on with Brash Games, and the fact that Brash Games basically gives the writers the permissions to post live on the website, which is not necessarily uncommon for smaller sites or indeed medium sites, but it shows a lack of care and attention. It shows that there's no editorial process, there's no one proofreading those articles, the site is not proofreaded of any kind. You can post anything you want there and it will just go live, and no one's checking that. No one's checking for grammar errors, no one's checking for information errors. Just there's no kind of quality assurance in that regard, which is bad enough. Forgetting all the other things, that in itself is bad enough. Now, it is expensive and lengthy to find editors, and it's a time-consuming process. And in an industry where being first is always dead important, having an editorial process, especially when you are unpaid volunteers and you're working full-time jobs, is a very difficult thing to get right. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. But like I said, this is not uncommon in a lot of smaller to medium sites. Even a few big sites, you would be surprised at the lack of editorial and quality assurance processes. And for me, it has always been a problem. I have worked for sites that this is the case, and it is something that I have always been against. For the example, the sites that I have run or I have helped the owners, start up any given games journalist website, it is something that I have insisted upon. You have to have editors, you have to have a filter, you have to have a check process, because that's what you do. It ensures the accuracy of the information, it ensures the quality of the information, and it protects the site and the consumer from a lot of nonsense. As someone who has been responsible for a writing staff of unpaid volunteers, the thing that probably angered me the most about all of the allegations with Brash Games was the fact that they were promising exposure and experience to these writers and then deleting their name accreditation on the articles, and Paul Ryan was replacing it with his own name, making it look like he'd done all the work. I think that is absolutely disgusting. I think it is abhorrent. It's not even human. I think for, someone who has worked in the industry for a long time now and has experienced both good and bad of smaller sites and big sites, I can tell you right now how absolutely soul-destroying that is to a writer. Because you are the one, especially for games reviews take a long time, especially when you're not getting paid for it. It is a passion of love. It is a labor of love. You are playing that game, take for example any given RPG. You're playing a game for 60 hours, then you're doing hours of writing, you are proofreading your article, you're checking it, you then format it onto the website, you insert all the images, you're making sure that it's all correct, you've done everything that you need to do. That's a lengthy process not to get paid anything. And then once you've done that, some dickhead is just removing your name from that article. I think that is absolutely abhorrent. And that guy, he's obviously not ashamed of himself, but he bloody well should be. And for me, just for that alone, forgetting all of the other shady shit that is involved with Brash Games right now, for that alone, that website should be dead. Dead. Flat out destroyed, because that is utterly disgusting. This site has now got over a dozen former authors and writers complaining and telling their stories about what Paul Ryan and Brash Games has done. And let me tell you something about being an unpaid writer. It is not only difficult, it is time consuming, and you basically get very little back from it. That's just flat out. Now, when I have previously been responsible for unpaid writing staff, it is very much a case of I've tried to help them in other areas. And for example, there would be cases where my writing staff would be like, oh, I really need to get another job. So I would help them in the industry, or I would help them in, any kind of work scenario whereby I would provide them with really good recommendation letters. I would help them, create their own portfolios. I would help them do 101 different things that would make them, even though I could not pay them at the time, it would be a case of I would make them employable as hell to other companies or to other sites in a related industry that could pay them. And I have had several cases where my former writing staff have gone on to paid positions within the industry and outside of the industry, directly relating to the experience and the things that I helped them create. And that's something of value that I could add to them for their work. And I think that the fact that Brash Games just basically uses these people like slaves is absolutely disgusting. And it is synonymous with a real big problem in the industry, in the fact that the industry underpays its journalist staff. Just flat out. Even the big sites underpay their staff. Not to mention the fact that the big sites have a real big problem with the fact that they have a paid writing staff, and then what they like to do is they like to use a shit ton of unpaid interns, and then they just cycle and farm those out every 6 to 12 months, bring in another load of new interns and make them do the same thing over and over again. Now, to give you some finances and to give you some figures about what people get paid in the industry, if you work at places like IGN and GameSpot, you're looking at a decent wage, right? You're looking at 20,000 plus. If you don't work at GameSpot and thing, you have absolutely no idea what you could make. But I will give you an example. I have previously worked for a pretty well-known site. I freelanced for them, and I have done that for several websites now. And a lot of those sites will pay you next to nothing. So, for example, you maybe get $40 for a review, right? Which doesn't seem like a lot, especially if you've put in 60 plus hours into that. Not only that, but for news writers, for example, I was offered once a position as a full-time news writer, which would require me to basically write 10 articles a day. Okay, 10 news articles a day, Monday to Friday, and I would be paid $800 a month for that. Now, put that in perspective, okay? It would take you roughly 30 to 45 minutes, maybe an hour if it's a long article, to write any given news article. That puts your workload at roughly 6 to 10 hours a day, which basically means that in terms of hourly value, at best, you're probably making $5 an hour. More than likely, you're making $3 to $4 an hour. Maybe even less on some occasions. That is abhorrent. It's below minimum wage regardless of where the website is. It doesn't matter if it's in the US, in the UK, wherever, it's below minimum wage. And that is a general rule across the industry. Writers, journalists are all underpaid dramatically. The majority of websites will either use unpaid volunteers or they will use unpaid interns. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that that's an all negative thing. There are several cases in several websites, and there's more than that, that have a really strong writing staff. Yes, they are unpaid volunteers, but they provide benefits in other ways. They do things to help their writers out in other ways, and there's a multitude of things that happens there. And at the end of the day, especially for a lot of unpaid volunteers in those good companies, they want to be there. They want to be there because it's something that they love. They want to help the company. They want to help themselves. And there's all sorts of things going on there. In terms of Brash Games, though, I have to say this. It seems to me that you have exploited your workforce. You have basically made it so that, I mean, what I love, one thing, just as a side note, I love the fact that instead of on their About Us section, they comment on the companies and publishers that they work with, and they call them clients rather than these are the publishers that we work with and they provide us with review keys and stuff. He calls them clients, which means for me, it would not surprise me in the least, and this is an allegation, I have no proof to back this up, but I would say this. It would not surprise me if that man was using unpaid volunteers to review video games that he was getting directly paid for. And I will put it that way, because it clearly shows that the man has no professionalism and no ethics. Therefore, I would not be surprised if he had taken money for reviews, if all of the ad money was going to him and his cronies and none of it was going to the unpaid writers, which is obviously the case. And it's very much that I would imagine that given the amount of content that they put out on a daily basis and based on the ad revenue scale at the moment, I would reckon that whatever money he's making is going directly into his pocket, and none of the writers, even like the permanent writers, are probably seeing next to nothing of that. And it's, there is a problem with site owners, especially in the enthusiast press. Website owners can be real. They're a strange breed, let's put it that way. Pretty much nearly every website owner I have ever worked with, they are a very, very strange breed. And a lot of them don't have a ounce of professionalism. A lot of them have no training in journalism. They have no training in video game journalism. They have no ethics knowledge. They have no, in terms of professionalism, they struggle in that department as well. And they're very much a special breed, and it's something that, I now continue to avoid getting involved with a lot of website owners because they are very problematic at times. Overall, though, this is, Brash Games is a symptom. It is a symptom. It's not a cause. Brash Games is a symptom of an industry that does not look after its own. And that is the truth of the matter. This industry does not look after its own. There's multiple reasons why that is, including the fact that, advertising models are failing around the board. Just think back in the past 5 years, how many video game websites that you have known, big websites as well, that have gone under because traditional advertising models are not working anymore. People use ad blocker. People, don't want to see advertisements on websites. And so video game journalist websites struggle to make ends meet. And so they have to utilize different resources for that, which directly means that, writers don't get treated well whatsoever. And it's a real problem. And I've always said this when people have asked me, how do I break into games journalism? Don't do it for the money, because there isn't any in it anymore. And that's just flat out. There isn't. Unless you are super lucky and you get in with one of the, the really big outlets like IGN or like GameSpot, and you get a paid position there that is secure, I can guarantee you now, if you freelance, there's going to be months where you get nothing. And that's a real problem in the industry at the moment, and it's something that needs to be addressed in the future. I think that, the games industry, in terms of its press, needs stronger regulation. There needs to be innovation within revenue streams, and I think that, viewers need to support games journalists more. I mean, it's a case of, yes, you may not always agree with them, but if they provide you a service that you enjoy and that you regularly use, then you should be supporting them in whatever way you can. I'm not saying support the website, I'm saying support the individual journalist. And places like Patreon have gone a long way to help that fact, but even those systems are not perfect, because you have Patreon system, it's a popularity contest. That's what it is. It's, if you're popular, you'll get lots of money. And if you ain't popular, no point in being on there. And that's the truth of the matter. Things like Patreon, they're a popularity contest. You have one journalist earning 10 grand a month, and then you have the rest of the journalists earning nothing. And that isn't a sustainable system. That isn't a system that's going to work long term. And so I think that there needs to be regulation. The industry needs to come together to find a way to support the journalists and support the press, and ultimately it is something that needs looked at. But in terms of Brash Games and the underbelly of enthusiast press and video games journalists. I think that it is something that you can never get rid of, just like you can never get rid of developers who, asset flip and try to take, a quick buck from the consumer. You'll never be able to fully get rid of it, but I think that when you do find it, you need to be vigilant against it, and when you do find cases like Brash Games, you need to come down hard on them. And I think that's it's a case of you've just got to police the industry, and you've got to police, every side of the industry, publishers, developers, press, and that's the case with every industry. Police it, be vigilant, and then when you find something out like this, come down hard on them so that you just get rid of them, and it's a deterrent to others from doing that. And that's all I have to say on that matter. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, make sure to subscribe and share the video around. And as always, I will see you next time.